That night, Marissa sat in her small apartment, where the soft murmur of the old television was the only sound left to fill the silence. 2 years had passed since she lost her beloved husband, Ethan, in a sudden accident. Yet the emptiness he left behind had never healed a wound that refused to close. And then, out of the dense midnight air, a familiar voice drifted from the kitchen, a voice she knew by heart. Ethan's. Her body trembled as she moved towards it, each step heavy, her bare feet meeting the cold wooden floor. Her heartbeat thundered loud enough that she could hear it echo in her chest. Whatever waited for her beyond that moment, even if fleeting, was about to alter her life forever. The apartment was washed in the faint blue glow of the television, a pale river of light sliding across the walls. She hadn't paid attention to the program for years, but its constant hum pushed back against the horror of silence. Curled into her sofa, she wrapped the blanket around her shoulders like fragile armor, a shield against the darkness pressing in. She had long ago made a habit of leaving the television on through night and day. Not for the content, for the company, for the illusion that she wasn't completely irrevocably alone. It had been 2 years since Ethan, the companion, the missing piece, the center of her life, had gone. Silence had never been peace for Marissa. Silence was a chasm, a reminder of what she had lost and could never replace. At the office, she was the bright one, the quick wit, who lifted tension with a story or a joke. She never allowed anyone to see the cracks in her. People have enough sorrows of their own, she always told herself. They don't need mine, too. But when the door closed behind her, the mask slipped away. Here it was, only her, the television, and a heart that hadn't yet mended. Her gaze wandered to the corner of the room, to the wedding photo, standing solemnly on the wooden shelf. Ethan's smile was radiant, his eyes glimmering with summer sunlight. He had been a biology teacher, in love with birds and trees. She remembered the way he would patiently teach her the difference between a skylark and a nightingale's song, or tell her about the impossible journeys of birds across continents. The memory tugged her back to the morning they first met. She had been reading beneath an oak in the park when a sparrow landed on her book. She held her breath frozen, and then a voice whispered behind her, "Don't move. I want to capture this." She turned slightly. A young man with a camera slung over his shoulder, his face lit by sunlight, his eyes bright as stars. But before he could take the photo, the sparrow lifted its wings and was gone. She laughed, and he only shrugged with that soft smile. A second too late. A pity. But sometimes memories are lovelier than photographs. And she replied almost without thinking, "Memories don't fade." What began as a brief conversation stretched longer than either had expected. They spoke of books of birds, of the small miracles of morning. When he left, he smiled. "I'm Ethan. I hope we meet here again." And they did. A second time, a third, until coincidence turned into intent. On the fourth meeting, Ethan handed her a small box. Inside was a silver necklace with a delicate bird pendant. So, you'll remember he told her that birds bring freedom and new beginnings. Perhaps they even carry messages from faraway places. From that day, birds became their secret language. Whenever faced with a choice, an apartment, a trip, even the day he proposed, they waited for a bird to appear a sign from the skies. She still remembered that moment. Under the oak tree where they had first met, Ethan dropped to one knee. Just then, a skylark sang above them. He smiled, took her hand. "See, even the birds agree with me." Sweet and aching that memory. Because now Ethan was gone, and the birds had abandoned her too. Still she wore the necklace every day, the silver cool against her skin. It made her shiver when she touched it, but it tethered her faith, however fragile, to him. In the kitchen, a plate of salad sat, untouched, no one across the table to tease her for eating so slowly. The empty chair was a black hole that devoured the room. Each bite tasted of nothing. Meals had become only survival. She propped her chin in her hand, tears blurring her eyes. Outside, a car horn called into the night, the wind stirred the curtains. But inside her, there was only absence. She was alive, yes, but not truly living. Not since him. Leaning back into her pillow, she exhaled, whispering as if to soothe herself. "I'll be all right, won't I?" The question fell into emptiness unanswered, A bitter smile flickered across her face. Out there she could convince the world she had moved on. But when darkness fell in these four walls, the truth had nowhere to hide. In that moment, she wished for a bird to pass by, a reminder that she was still on the right path. But the window stayed closed, the only movement the silver spill of moonlight spread across the floor. She closed her eyes. A single tear slid onto the pillow. Her heart still ached, but deep inside, a fragile seed of hope trembled. Perhaps one day the song of birds would return, leading her out of the long, voiceless nights. The next morning, Marissa stepped onto the balcony, cradling a warm cup of coffee between her hands. Spring air was clear, and sharp sunlight spilling gold across a street slowly waking. For most, it was the familiar start of an ordinary day. For Marissa, it was a mirror of the emptiness inside her. Her fingers toyed with the bird-shaped pendant at her throat. Cold to the touch, yet the only thing that made her feel less alone. For 2 years, she hadn't once taken it off. Not for sleep, not for showers. Friends told her to put it away to lighten the load on her heart. To outsiders, it might have seemed like clinging an old habit she could not release. But for Marissa, it was the only way to keep moving. She whispered as though confiding in herself. Birds are love. They are guidance. Ethan, you're still out there somewhere, aren't you? You'll tell me when I'm ready to be brave again. A breeze slipped through the curtains. Marissa lifted her gaze, willing a bird to appear. But the sky held only slow-drifting clouds. Her chest tightened, and yet instead of tears, a smile touched her lips. A smile threaded with both gentleness and sorrow. She knew she was still waiting, for a sign, a message from a love long gone, something that would one day give her courage to welcome the new. The newsroom stirred with its usual chorus printers, chattering keyboards, clicking editors, murmuring. Marissa arrived with her canvas bag slung lightly over her shoulder, her ready smile like another piece of clothing she never forgot to wear. To those around her, she was the very picture of cheer unburdened. "Morning, Marissa. More pastries for us?" Someone teased. She laughed, holding up the box. "If I didn't, none of us would survive the mountain of manuscripts today." Laughter rippled across the room, and for a fleeting moment, her heart felt lighter. These were the moments she clung to. The parts of herself that still wanted to bring comfort to others. That morning, during the editorial meeting, the editor-in-chief slid a folder across the table. "You'll take charge of our new children's book project. We've partnered with a gifted illustrator. You'll work closely with him to weave words and images together." Marissa nodded, accepting the file. The name on the cover stood out: Gabriel Mason. Later that afternoon, she entered a small meeting room to greet her new collaborator. The door swung open to reveal a tall man with broad shoulders, hair slightly disheveled, glasses, framing eyes intent on the sketches before him. He hadn't noticed her standing there. "Excuse me, are you Gabriel?" she asked. He looked up. Behind the lenses were warm brown eyes and a slow, steady smile. "Yes, that's me, and you must be Marissa, the lead editor." "That's right. It's a pleasure to work with you." They shook hands. His palm was large and steady, his grip firm yet unexpectedly gentle. It was enough to make her breathe out a quiet sigh she hadn't realized she was holding. They began to discuss the project, a children's guide to constellations meant to be both lively and scientifically sound. Marissa laid out her ideas. Gabriel listened closely, jotting notes now and then. He didn't interrupt, he didn't rush. He simply waited for her to finish before offering his thoughts. "I think we could add warmer tones to the night sky," he suggested softly. "So children will feel it's a place they can belong to." "What do you think?" Marissa smiled. "Exactly. That's what I hoped for. You caught on so quickly." He gave a small wry smile. "Perhaps because I prefer listening over arguing. Good ideas tend to grow in the spaces between words." She faltered for a moment, struck by the calm weight of his voice. It had been so long since she'd met someone who spoke with such steady kindness. In her world, most hurried to prove themselves. But Gabriel was different. He truly listened. Their meetings became a quiet rhythm in her days. At first she reminded herself, it's just work. But each time she walked into the room and saw him waiting, sketches stacked neatly in front of him, she felt a strange ease settle over her. He spoke sparingly, yet every word was measured and thoughtful. Even his silences weren't awkward. They opened a space where she could breathe more deeply, as if for the first time in years she was breathing fully. One evening they sat side by side reviewing the final draft. The room glowed with the warm light of a single desk lamp. Marissa sighed. Authors really do have boundless imagination, writing about the entire universe and still expecting children to understand it all. Gabriel chuckled. But children, in truth, imagine far more than adults ever could. Perhaps all we need is to trust them. His words made her laugh too. The sound lingered in the quiet room, and for the first time in years, it wasn't a laugh to disguise pain. It was real. Day by day, Marissa realized that Gabriel's presence carried a gentleness she hadn't known she was craving. He didn't probe into her past. He didn't touch the empty space she wasn't ready to reveal. He simply listened. And sometimes that silence was the sweetest comfort of all. One afternoon, they stopped by a cafe near the office. Marissa playfully told a story about a colleague spilling coffee all over a manuscript. Gabriel laughed slow and kind. "You tell stories beautifully," he said. "If you ever wrote a memoir, it would be a bestseller." She pouted in mock protest. "If I wrote one, it would be nothing but nonsense. No one would read it." Gabriel leaned in slightly, his voice warm and steady. "I would." And at those words, Marissa's heart quivered. A feeling she thought had vanished long ago stirred quietly back to life. Something unfamiliar began to stir within Marissa, a quiet warmth she could not yet name, like embers in a long, cold hearth, flickering to life again. Gabriel's slow smile, hidden behind thick-rimmed glasses, lingered in her thoughts. Her hand found the silver bird at her throat, her voice barely a breath. "Ethan, I don't know what this is, but perhaps you'd want me to smile again, wouldn't you?" Night fell and sorrow stayed. Yet deep in her heart, Marissa realized something, maybe the sign she had been waiting for. The one she once thought would come on the wings of birds was beginning to take shape in the kindness of a colleague with a gentle smile. The next afternoon, the office buzzed unusually loud. Buried in a mountain of manuscripts, Marissa's red pen raced across lines of text. She was so engrossed she didn't notice Gabriel standing nearby. "Planning to eat your lunch on top of these papers." His tone was half teasing, half serious. She startled, looking up, caught between apology and laughter. "I was only trying to save some time." "A terrible habit, I know." Gabriel's smile softened. "Then let's step out. I know a place quieter than this room full of printers." She hesitated, but the warmth in his eyes, the kindness behind his glasses made refusal impossible. The little eatery he led her to was tucked in a narrow alley. Nothing fancy, just wooden tables, the fragrance of hot soup curling into the air. Marissa laughed when he chose the table by the window. "You really do prefer simplicity." "Absolutely," he replied, voice low and calm. "I've never belonged in noisy places. A quiet corner is enough." Over their meal, Gabriel spoke of his family, parents and siblings still living in another state. Distance had grown not only in miles, but in unspoken disagreements ever since he chose art as his life. "I've never regretted the path I chose," he sighed. "But sometimes the distance makes me feel like I'm standing outside looking in." Marissa fell silent. His words pressed against a secret ache of her own. The hollow of losing her anchor, the feeling of walking into a room and realizing no one was left to share it with. She gave a small nod, a thin smile. "You're not the only one. I know what loneliness feels like." Gabriel didn't pry. He only nodded, his gaze carrying quiet understanding. And it was that silence, that absence of demand, that made her feel safer than she had in years. Later, before leaving the office, Gabriel stopped by her desk. "If you're not in a rush, I know a cafe that makes wonderful jasmine tea." Marissa froze. It had been so long since she'd said yes to anything beyond work. Her heart skipped her mind, rushing in to caution her. "It's just tea, nothing more." The cafe was softly lit with golden lamps, jazz whispering through the air, the fragrance of flowers floating from cups of tea. Across from him, Marissa found her gaze lingering on Gabriel's hands as he stirred his cup. Large, steady each movement, careful, unhurried. "Do you ever regret leaving your family behind?" she asked. He paused, considered, then shook his head. "I believe every sorrow carries its own worth. Without it, I might never have learned how to truly listen to what people need." She stayed quiet, the lamplight catching in his eyes. Warm, amber rich, like sunlight trapped in honey. She realized how long it had been since she'd spoken so freely without fear, without pity. With Gabriel, conversations carried no weight, no awkwardness. Just two souls side by side sharing the emptiness they both knew. When they finally left, twilight had deepened to violet. Walking side by side through the quiet street, Marissa heard their footsteps fall in rhythm together. Warmth rose in her chest, as though the stone that had pressed on her for years had been lifted. Yet a sudden sting pricked her heart. What am I doing, she wondered, laughing, finding peace with another man? Was that betraying Ethan? Her fingers clutched the necklace tight. In her mind, Ethan's face appeared, his eyes soft, but touched with reproach. Her lip trembled, her heart clenched. Gabriel noticed her tension tilted his head. "You all right?" She forced a smile, hiding the storm within. "Just tired. I'm fine." He didn't push. He simply slowed his pace, walking closer beside her. That restraint, his quiet, steady presence, was enough to make her heart tremble. He didn't ask, didn't demand. He was just there, and somehow that alone made her feel she wasn't utterly alone. That night back home, Marissa left the television on, as always. A documentary about ancient cities droned softly, the narrator's voice like a thin blanket against the room's hollow quiet. Blue light skimmed the walls, glinted across the photo frame, brushed the petals of white chrysanthemums, then dissolved into shadow. Curled on the sofa blanket pulled tight around her chest, Marissa surrendered to her ritual. As long as there was sound, she believed she wasn't entirely alone. She closed her eyes, letting the background hum carry her into that fragile space between waking and sleep. Then, click, the screen went black. The sound was gone. Silence surged in thick and cold as ice. Marissa jolted awake, her heartbeat pounding. She glanced at the remote lying abandoned on the cushion. A power cut. But no. The neon sign outside still glowed red, the neighbor's windows still lit with warm gold. And then a sound, barely there, thin as breath. "Marissa?" The voice hadn't come from the television. It floated in the air, soft as silk, heavy as stone, pressing down on her chest. Marissa shot upright, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. Every nerve in her body strung tight. The voice, there was no mistaking it, was Ethan's. "Marissa?" Clearer this time, as though it slid along the hallway, brushing against her skin. Warm, tender, like the smile he used to give her at the end of each day. She stood frozen at the edge of the rug legs, trembling as if they no longer belonged to her. She wanted to believe it was a dream, a trick of memory. But the sensation was too real. The silence around her was so sharp, she could hear her heartbeat. She drew in a deep breath, and then she stepped forward. Each footfall struck the wooden floor, echoing hollow and long, stretching into the vast stillness of the night. Moonlight spilled along the hallway, drawing silver threads across the darkness, stitching shadow and light into a fragile tapestry. The air carried the faint scent of damp wood and wild daisies. Everything was as familiar as always. Only Marissa's heartbeat faltered, racing like a drum out of rhythm. As she passed the wooden shelf, the moon rested on their wedding photograph. Ethan's smile gleamed, his eyes shining like midsummer sun. Her trembling fingers touched the frame, her whisper so soft, she feared even her breath might shatter the memory. "Ethan, is that you?" A breeze stirred. Or was it only her imagination? She couldn't be sure. Then the voice called again, a third time, soft as a lullaby. "Marissa." It drifted from the kitchen. Marissa swallowed hard, her hand clutching the silver bird at her throat. Cold metal pressed against her skin, a tiny spark of order in the chaos. She quickened her pace. At the kitchen door, her palms damp with sweat, she flicked the switch. Click. Warm light flooded the room. Shining on the spotless counter, the cup abandoned by the sink, the neatly folded dish towel. No one there. And yet, something had changed. The window above the sink was ajar, curtains breathing gently like the rise and fall of a chest. And on the sill, a small skylark perched, its head tilted toward her, dark eyes glimmering, catching shards of moonlight. Its soft brown feathers gleamed like silk, its wings fragile as glass in the glow. A creature so ordinary in daylight, no one would look twice. Yet now, its presence sanctified the kitchen. Marissa held her breath. Any movement might send it flying, and with it, the thin thread that bound her to Ethan might snap. Her voice trembled like a leaf. "You've come to say goodbye, haven't you?" Of course the skylark did not answer. It simply stood there in a silence so deep it seemed to still time itself. Then, unexpectedly, it sang. A short cascade of notes, pure as molten silver, delicate as silk, rising and dissolving against the brick walls. Fragile as a strand of hair, yet enough to fill the kitchen whole. Tears slipped down Marissa's face. She let them fall. Her body seemed to remember what to do. Her shoulders eased her chest, opened her breath, deepened and slowed. The song touched the place she had avoided for 2 years. She let it flood through her like a spring stream soaking parched earth. "Ethan," she whispered so soft only she could hear. "I'm here." The skylark blinked, tilted its head, a gesture that felt like a nod. Then it spread its wings. In a heartbeat, it cut across the moonlight, casting a shimmering shadow on the wall before vanishing into the night air. The window trembled softly, leaving only the ticking of the clock behind. Once that sound had frightened her, now it was gentle, steady, warm. She stepped forward, closed the window, and let her palm rest on the sill, gazing down at the street below, glowing golden as honey. The city hadn't changed, the world hadn't shifted, but something inside her had. Not an explosion, just an old hinge creaking open, letting light through a crack. She returned to the living room. The television screen was still black, reflecting her small figure in the glass. She didn't turn it back on. Yes, she still feared silence. But this silence was different. No longer a black hole, but a still lake rippled by the wings of a bird. She sank onto the sofa, turning the pendant over in her hand. The silver bird lay in her palm, cold as morning dew. Closing her eyes, she whispered, "I understand now. Birds are signs. They are love. They are the way forward." Tears rose again, but this time they were warm, like spring rain, gentle, grateful. She didn't need logic. She only needed to trust the feeling rising from the depths of her heart. Ethan would not return. She knew that. But love hadn't vanished. It had only changed shape, into memory, into longing, into the little bird that had visited tonight. Marissa pulled the blanket around her shoulders. Without the television's drone, she heard the city breathing in the distance like a lullaby, stitching itself into the night sky. Images overlapped in her mind. Shattered sunlight in the park, their first meeting, the camera that missed the moment, the pendant in its little box, Ethan's voice. "When you see a bird, trust that you're on the right path." She smiled through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered, to the photo frame, to the sky, to her own heart. "I'll try." Marissa switched off the kitchen light and walked the moonlit hallway. Each step was lighter, each shadow less fearsome. At her bedroom door, she drew the curtain aside, leaving the faintest gap. Perhaps tomorrow, when sunlight rested on the rooftop, opposite a bird would pass by. She lay down without switching on the television. The window stayed open, letting in the night air. The scent of leaves, damp stone, the city's breath. Her hand rested on the pendant, her heartbeat steadying. At the edge of sleep, she thought she heard it. The skylark's song, faint as thread, strong as wire. "You're not alone. Keep walking. We'll always find the way home." In the tender dark, a smile bloomed on her lips, small as a wild daisy. For the first time in years, she fell into deep sleep. Not because sound filled the emptiness, but because her heart had been touched. A delicate door had opened, and beyond it, the sky was still wide enough for another love to learn to fly. In the hush of gentle stillness, sleep came to Marissa like a ribbon of silk, clear and bright as dawn. She found herself standing in the familiar park beneath the old oak, whose branches spread wide like a vast green roof. Morning sunlight shattered into golden shards, tumbling onto damp grass, where brittle leaves crumbled beneath her shoes. Everything glowed with strange brilliance, the scent of earth after night. Rain, the whisper of water from the distant fountain, a white butterfly drifting lazily over the flower beds. Marissa looked down, the old book still nestled in her hand, her companion through countless mornings. The bird-shaped pendant pressed against her chest, but this time it was warm, as though touched by sunlight. And then, he was there. Ethan sat on the wooden bench beneath the oak, the very place they had first met. He lifted his head, his eyes bright. His smile unchanged, the light painting a faint halo across his hair. She wanted to run to him, but her legs froze, held by a fragile fear. that if she moved too quickly, the vision would vanish like mist. "Ethan!" Her voice was no more than breath. He rose, stepped closer until their eyes met. He held out his hand. She reached for it, laying her own into his warm, steady palm. The touch was so real that tears welled before she even realized. "You're here," he said, his voice soft as a morning greeting. "I thought I'd forgotten how to dream of you," Marissa whispered, lips trembling. "Last night I heard your voice, and a skylark." Ethan only smiled as though he had known all along. They walked side by side along the leaf-strewn path, sunlight spilling in golden squares between the branches. Every sound, the crunch of footsteps, the rustle of leaves, the chatter of birds, was the face of memory. "I used to be afraid of silence," Marissa confessed, watching a sparrow land on a stone. "I left the television on through the night as if it were a lantern to keep the dark from swallowing you." Ethan looked at her, his voice warm as mid-morning sun. "Silence doesn't take anything from you. It only gives you back the sound of your own heart. Marissa, you must give yourself the chance to live again." "Live again!" The words dropped into her, rippling outward like a pebble on water. Her hand found the pendant, her voice trembling. "But what if I forget you? Forget the smell of your shirt, the sound of your laugh, the way you said my name." Ethan shook his head, his eyes deep as the sky after rain. "Some things don't depend on memory. They're etched in places where just one touch brings them alive. Marissa, whenever you see a bird, remember, I still want you to be happy." A breeze rustled through, carrying birdsong. The sparrow lifted, traced a delicate arc, and disappeared into the leaves. Marissa looked up, her eyes blurred with tears. "I've been waiting for a sign," she whispered, "but I was too afraid to believe in it." Ethan's smile softened. "Faith doesn't need great courage, only half a breath." They walked until the path split in two. One trail narrowed into shadow, winding uphill through dense woods. The other opened wide and sunlit, leading into a vast field. Ethan paused, looked at both, then turned to her. "This is my road," he said, pointing to the slope. "That one is yours. Can't we walk a little further together?" Marissa asked, her smile fragile as glass. Ethan shook his head, his tone gentle. "We've already walked so far. That path won't vanish. It's in you, in your laughter, in the way you look at the sky, in the smallest things you dare to do, in the faith you place in the flight of a bird." Marissa no longer tried to hold herself together. She let love and sorrow spill at once, neither fighting nor clinging. She stepped into his arms. His embrace was still her refuge, carrying the scent of sunlight and paper, like the afternoons he marked essays by the window. "Thank you," she whispered into his shoulder, "for loving me, and for finding me still here in a dream." Ethan pulled back just enough to rest his hand against her pendant. His warmth pressed into the cold silver, a bridge between past and present. He bent to kiss her forehead, light as a bird's wing, brushing water. "Go, Marissa," he murmured, so soft even the trees seemed to bow and listen. "The sky is still wide enough for you to fly again." She wanted to say everything, that she loved him, that he would never be forgotten, that no matter how the winds turned, she would always find her way back to the smallest sign. But her throat closed, and all she could manage was a nod. Ethan stepped back, then another, before turning toward the shaded slope. He didn't look behind. He only raised a hand in farewell, the same way he had each morning they parted at the door. Sunlight poured across his back. For an instant, she saw him dissolve into the trees, part of the path itself, peaceful whole, slipping further away. When his figure disappeared, birdsong rang bright and far. Marissa stood still at the crossroads, her hand on the pendant. Her cheeks were wet, but her chest felt as though a door had opened. Through it came wind, sunlight, leaves, and a simple message: "Live on." The scene began to fade, colors thinning, the park veiled in soft mist. She heard her heartbeat, steady, warm, like footsteps on a sunlit path. Marissa woke as the first rays of morning pierced the curtains. Her pillow was damp. She lifted her hand to her cheek, the tears not yet dry. The room was silent, but no longer devouring. Morning air drifted through the open window, carrying the trill of birds outside. She sat up without reaching for the television. Her fingers closed around the pendant, a small squeeze like greeting an old friend. A quiet smile touched her lips. Not dazzling, but sure, like sunlight breaking through cloud. "I will live on," she said, to the room, to the sky, to the man who had taught her to believe in small signs. and whenever I see a bird, I'll remember you wanted me happy." On the windowsill, a brown blur flitted past and was gone. Perhaps a sparrow, perhaps only sunlight shifting. Marissa didn't need to know the difference. She rose and walked toward the kitchen where the morning was waiting. The vase of daisies on the kitchen table needed fresh water. Breakfast was nothing more than a slice of toast, a smear of marmalade, and a steaming cup of jasmine tea. Small, ordinary things, so unremarkable they often went unnoticed. Yet this morning, they glowed as if touched by a new kind of light. Marissa's heart felt lighter. Not because sorrow had vanished, but because she had finally found somewhere to set it down. And from the deep place where dreams still lingered, Ethan's voice came back to her, distant and close all at once. "The sky is still wide enough, Marissa. Fly freely." That morning, she woke before the alarm. Sunlight slipped through the curtain's edge slender, as a golden ribbon wound around the window frame. The room was quiet, filled only with bird song, outside the soft whir of bicycle wheels on the street and the steady rhythm of her own breathing. And strangely, the silence no longer felt like a bottomless pit. It was more like a still lake, clear enough to see the bottom. She left her bed shivering with delight as her feet touched the cool wooden floor. Pulling back the curtains, she opened the window to let the morning breeze rush in, carrying the scent of damp leaves and a faint trace of coffee from the little shop at the end of the street. By habit, her hand reached for the remote control, but stopped midway. Today she wanted to try something different. She prepared a simple breakfast: warm bread, spread with butter and marmalade, a pot of jasmine tea perfuming the air. As the butter melted into the toast, she realized it had been so long since she had truly savored a peaceful morning meal. Carrying a small tray, she stepped onto the balcony. The lavender pots she had planted the year before were budding again, purple and fragrant. The city below was stirring awake. A newspaper boy rattled past with his cart. A schoolgirl with a ponytail clutched her satchel. A golden dog tugged its owner along the pavement, nose twitching, tail wagging. Marissa sat in the wicker chair and placed the tray on the iron table. She blew gently across the rim of her cup, letting the steam kiss her cheek. The jasmine fragrance curled around her, so soothing it felt like someone brushing a hand through her hair. No television, no artificial noise. Silence, it turned out, wasn't an enemy at all. It was an old friend waiting patiently for her return after years of avoidance. She bit into the toast, butter marmalade, crisp, sweet tart, all folded into one complete flavor. "So, breakfast can taste this good," she murmured with a soft laugh. For 2 years her meals had been swallowed, hurriedly emptied of all taste. A flicker of movement caught her eye. She looked up. On the wire, a brown sparrow tilted its head toward her, its eyes bright with curiosity. Warmth rose in her chest like the gaze from last night's dream, finding her again. "Whenever you see a bird, remember that I want you happy." Ethan's dream voice, soft as a falling leaf, had been stitched invisibly into this morning. Marissa lingered longer than planned. She did nothing grand, just breathe, sip tea, and watch the street. Yet suddenly everything looked achingly beautiful. She smiled to herself. Perhaps she was learning how to live again, starting with the simplest lessons: to eat, to breathe, to look, to smile. At the newsroom, the day's rhythm was its usual frenzy: printers chattering, chairs, scraping voices calling across the desks. Marissa set down her bag just as Gabriel turned from the window, sketches in hand, squinting into the sun. He looked up at the exact moment her eyes met his. That slow smile, familiar now, appeared behind his thick glasses. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm as freshly poured tea. "You look brighter today." Marissa touched her cheek lightly and laughed. "Maybe because I slept well and had breakfast on the balcony, without the television." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "That's a good habit. In silence, people often hear the most interesting things." Like what she asked, half teasing, half curious. He smiled, like themselves, and sometimes birds too. Together they carried their files into the small meeting room. Marissa spread the manuscript across the table. Gabriel pulled a slim picture book from his bag, its cover a sky blue scatter dotted with a tiny black bird. "I reread this last night," he said, sliding it toward her. "It's written for children, but even adults find their hearts softened by it. She brushed her fingers across the textured cover, then sat opposite him. He turned to a page marked with a slip of paper. Did you know migrating birds can fly thousands of miles across the ocean, yet return to the same place? People say they carry a compass inside, sensing the Earth's magnetic pull following the sun, the moon, the stars, even the scent of wind and shorelines. He lifted his gaze and his amber-brown eyes glowed in the sunlight. In other words, no matter how far they travel, they always know the way home. Marissa fell quiet. His words touched the very light that had flickered in her dream the night before. The sky is still wide enough. Fly freely, and whenever you see a bird, remember, I want you happy. Her heart trembled as though a string had been plucked to just the right note. Why did you say this today? She asked, half playful, half serious. The timing feels uncanny. Gabriel smiled. This morning, while I stood at the window, a flock passed over the rooftops. I thought, how lucky they are to always know their way back, even when the sky is wide and the winds change. Marissa smiled faintly, but her eyes stung. She leaned back, looking at him through the glass of his lenses, and realized something. The distance between them had shifted. Not vanished, but closing, turning into warmth. This coincidence, this quiet moment, felt like someone had placed a tiny key in her palm. Whether to use it, that was hers to decide. Do you believe in signs? She asked. Gabriel thought for a moment, then shrugged gently. I believe in what happens when we listen patiently. If you want to call that a sign, I won't argue. They bent again over their work. On Gabriel's page, new specks of light appeared in the night sky, bringing constellations closer to hand. On Marissa's ornate words gave way to gentler phrases easier for a child to hold. Two currents running parallel, never colliding, yet flowing into the same warm picture. Midway through, Eleanor stepped in with praise, then left. The door clicked shut, leaving the room filled with the quiet of paper and pen. In that hush, Marissa heard her heartbeat. Not out of fear, but because it was keeping time for a new melody. Not erasing the old song, only adding another verse. Last night I dreamt of the park, she said softly. Gabriel didn't press her. He only looked at her waiting. In the dream, there were two paths. One for the man I loved who is gone, one for me. I think this morning I took my first steps on my own path. Her throat tightened. When you spoke of migrating birds, I felt at peace. Gabriel nodded as though it was the most natural thing in the world. That's good, Marissa. We're all learning how to find our way home, each in our own way. Hearing her name on his lips no longer hurt. The syllables touched her softly, warmly. She exhaled, her chest full of new air. That evening, leaving the office with the manuscript in her hands, she looked up. The sunset drenched the rooftops in orange fire. A flock of small birds darted across the sky, arrow-shaped, before scattering into the wind. Her fingers rose to the pendant at her throat. She didn't speak. She only smiled. That night back home, she still switched on the television. Some habits needed time to release. But when the voices filled the screen, she turned the volume down until it was no more than a faint whisper. She opened the window, poured a cup of tea, and sat quietly. Beneath that distant hum, she could hear her own heartbeat, the rustle of the wind, and the same sparrow that had chirped from the wire that morning. Closing her eyes, Marissa whispered a promise to the sky. Slowly, I'm learning to find my way home. The following evening, late light slanted through the newsroom windows, painting the corridor gold. Marissa closed her laptop, slipped the manuscript into her bag, and prepared to leave as always. Just then, Gabriel appeared in the doorway, coat on, his familiar smile soft behind thick glasses. Marissa, he said, voice warm as an evening cup of tea. Would you like to have dinner with me tonight? No. Work talk, just dinner. A simple question, but her heart jolted. Inside, a storm gathered. Half of her trembled, ready to say no. The name Ethan still lived in every corner of her home, stitched into every fold of memory. But the other half, newer, braver, whispered, perhaps it's time to walk the road he showed me in the dream. Marissa drew in a deep breath, steadying her voice. Are you sure I don't want to complicate work? Gabriel shook his head, smiling lightly. It has nothing to do with work. I just want to know what you enjoy beyond piles of manuscripts. No pressure, only patient sincerity. Her heart softened. After a pause, she nodded. All right, The restaurant Gabriel chose sat on a quiet street, its glass front glowing beneath a cascade of bougainvillea. Inside, amber lights glowed, and a guitar threaded warm notes through the air. It wasn't grand, but it was the sort of place where stories bloomed naturally. Across the table, Marissa laughed when Gabriel ordered the simplest dish, pumpkin soup. "You're not one for culinary risks, are you?" "I like things clear," he said with a smile. "Simple usually lasts the longest." They shared a glass of white wine. In the amber light, her pasta steamed with the scent of basil and cheese. She sipped, and the sharp sweetness of the wine bloomed on her tongue. For the first time in 2 years, her taste awakened. Conversation flowed. Gabriel told her of painting stars on his bedroom ceiling as a boy to keep loneliness away. Marissa shared the night she and Ethan camped in the park waiting for sparrows to sing at dawn. Her voice faltered on his name, but Gabriel neither flinched nor hurried to change the subject. He simply nodded, eyes warm, saying without words, "I'm here. I respect this." The knot in her throat loosened. No one asked her to forget. No one demanded she bury it. Gabriel just sat there, patient present. And that was enough to make her feel sheltered, like standing beneath an awning in the middle of a long storm. When dinner ended, they walked out onto the cobbled street. Night had fallen, street lamps glowed golden, the breeze carried the sweetness of a nearby bakery. Marissa pulled her scarf closer, her breath turning to pale smoke. Gabriel walked beside her in silence, their footsteps the only rhythm. Near her apartment, he stopped and turned. "Thank you for saying yes tonight. I know it wasn't easy." Marissa looked up, her heart twisting. He was right. It wasn't easy at all. Inside, guilt flared. "Ethan, am I betraying you?" Tears gathered, but then another voice softer reminded her, "He wanted you happy. Every bird is a sign. You're only learning to live again." She smiled faintly, whispering, "Thank you for being patient." Gabriel's smile deepened, the streetlight scattering into his eyes. He held out his hand. Marissa hesitated a beat, then placed hers in his. His hand was warm, steady yet gentle, as though afraid to cause her pain. In that moment, she felt it. A soft click inside, like an old hinge opening, letting light in. Back in her apartment, she leaned against the door, her hand still tingling with warmth. The television hummed to life on its timer, a presenter's voice filling the room. But this time, she didn't rush to sit. She lifted her gaze to the window, where moonlight poured in like silver silk. Her fingers touched the pendant. Tears slipped down, but so did a smile. Ethan's absence still ached, yet beside it, a new space had opened. The fragile glow of another beginning. In her heart, she whispered, "My love, I'm learning how to fly again." In the days that followed, she felt the shift more clearly. At first, just a door cracked open, letting in a sliver of light. She still remembered Ethan still touched the pendant each morning. But alongside the grief laughter came easier breath lighter, and she let conversations with Gabriel stretch a little longer. The newsroom's pace hadn't changed, but for Marissa each hour with him carried a different rhythm. It wasn't just words and drawings anymore. She began to share more the tiny cafe where she spent Sunday mornings, the habit of reopening old novels when she felt lost, the lavender pots on her balcony she tended as a promise. Always make something worth waiting for. Gabriel never interrupted. He listened as though every detail mattered. Sometimes he simply smiled, replying gently, "That's lovely," or, "One day I'd like to see those lavender pots." That kind of listening made Marissa feel truly seen, something she hadn't felt in years. One evening, long after the office had emptied, they remained together in the small meeting room, working through the final draft of the children's book. The desk lamp cast its golden glow, their shadows stretching across the wall. Beyond the window, city lights flickered, the streets hushed. Marissa slid the manuscript aside, leaning over to adjust one of Gabriel's sketches. And just then, his hand reached out too. Their fingertips touched only for a fleeting moment, light as a butterfly's wing, yet enough to make Marissa's heart stumble. Warmth spread from skin to skin, circling outward, quiet but steady. She pulled her hand back on instinct, her cheeks flushed with surprise. Gabriel paused only a second, offered the faintest smile, and calmly turned the page of his sketchbook, as though he had planted a seed and chosen to let it find its own way to bloom. Marissa sat still, her hand drifting to the pendant resting against her collarbone. Her heartbeat no longer raced. It rose and fell, like looking up at the sky after rain. Vast, a little overwhelming, but urging her forward. That night on her way home, she walked slower than usual. Her heels tapped a rhythm along the empty pavement, echoing through the quiet street. She thought of Ethan. The dream in the park, the farewell kiss on her forehead, his parting words. Give yourself the chance to live again. The memory still tugged sharply at her chest, but the pain had softened like a wound, healing under new skin. Still tender, but letting her breathe without breaking. In that picture, Gabriel's presence was not a substitute for what she had lost. He was a doorway into a room filled with light where she could carry both past and present without having to choose one over the other. Marissa lifted her gaze to the sky, dark and narrow between tall buildings. A patch of shadow opened suddenly, and for a heartbeat, she saw a bird glide across the city glow. She smiled, whispering Ethan, "I think you'd understand." That evening, the television flickered on out of habit. But this time, she lowered the sound to a faint hum, letting silence sit beside her. Curled on the sofa, hugging a small cushion, she let her thoughts drift the accidental touch of Gabriel's hand, his patient smile, the simple stories they had shared. Her heart still remembered Ethan, would always remember. But for the first time in 2 years, that memory was no longer a chain. It had become a gentle keepsake, leaving room for a new rhythm, hesitant yet already finding its tune. On a weekend afternoon, Marissa returned to the park, what she and Ethan once called their little cathedral. Sunlight stretched long across the grass. Children ran in laughter, old couples strolled with their dogs, and the early summer breeze carried the faint perfume of jasmine tea. She chose the wooden bench beneath the old oak, the same spot where Ethan had almost captured their first sparrow on film. Opening her book, her eyes kept slipping from the page. Memories she had tucked away burst open, spilling out. Across the lawn, a young couple sat close, the girl leaning into the boy's shoulder, both laughing over something on a phone screen. Their gaze sparkled like fresh water, the very light that had once filled her own mornings with Ethan. Marissa's throat tightened. In a single beat, the tide of loss surged violently. The phone call that shattered everything, Ethan's shirt still hanging on the chair, the apartment carved hollow. Images blurred, her eyes stung. She snapped the book shut, gulped in air, but a sob pressed to break free. Hot tears slid down her cheeks. Suddenly she rose and ran. As if by outrunning herself, she could escape the memory tearing her apart. She ran past leaf-strewn paths, past lavender beds until her legs gave way. She stopped at the lake's edge, clutching her chest. Breath ragged. "Ethan, I'm sorry," she whispered through sobs. "I smiled beside another man. I forgot how to keep you whole in my heart." In that moment, she felt fragile, torn, as though even her memories were betraying him. A hand touched her shoulder, light but steady. Marissa spun around. Gabriel stood there. She hadn't noticed him nearby, but his eyes held no judgment, only quiet concern. "Marissa," he said gently, voice low, "you don't have to run. I'm not here to replace anyone." She said nothing, her lips trembling. Gabriel stepped closer and drew her into an embrace. Not sudden, not crushing, just enough to keep her from collapsing. His shoulders were broad, his breath steady. Beneath that shelter for the first time, Marissa felt she was not alone in the storm inside her. "I only want to stand beside you. If you'll let me," he whispered, his words more promise than comfort. "I know you loved Ethan. That love is still here. It doesn't need to disappear for you to go on. I don't want you to forget. I only want to walk with you from here." The words slipped past the knot inside her, threading through the tight weave of her grief. Tears fell harder, but they no longer weighed her down. They flowed soft and cleansing, like a stream washing away buried guilt. Marissa leaned her forehead to his shoulder, eyes closed. In that quiet dark, she understood new love didn't erase the old. It didn't deny or replace. It stood beside it, the next verse in the song of her heart. Ethan would always be part of her, and Gabriel was opening another part, her present, her future. "I'm afraid," she admitted, voice breaking, "afraid that if I let myself love, I'll betray the past." Gabriel shook his head. "No, Marissa, The past is where you lived fully. That love was real, and a new love can be just as real. The human heart has no limits. It doesn't cut away. It only grows larger. She bit her lip, letting the truth of his words settle in. Relief spread softly inside her, like a door creaking open to let light pour through. By the time they left the park, the sky had turned a dusky shade of plum. Streetlights blinked on, scattering honey pools along the pavement. Marissa walked slowly, her fingers curled around the pendant. But now, it no longer felt like a chain holding her to the past. It was a bridge between two shores, Ethan on one side, Gabriel on the other. The pain remained, the tears too. But in between them, hope had made space. Gabriel walked at her pace, never rushing, never asking, just present as he had been from the beginning. And that was enough for Marissa to know she wasn't walking alone anymore. That night, the television hummed on, but she didn't look at the screen. Sitting on the sofa, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, she watched the silver sweep of moonlight through the window. Inside, her two streams ran side by side, the tender memory of Ethan and a fragile growing trust in Gabriel. She whispered toward Ethan, "I've never forgotten you, but I think you'd want me happy. I'll try." Beyond the glass, a bird swept past its wings loud in the quiet. Marissa smiled through tears, tears that felt like release. On another evening, she and Gabriel walked the lakeside near her home. The breeze smelled of fresh water. Children played on the grass. A bicycle bell chimed somewhere in the distance. The sky was a clear blue clouds drifting like small white boats. Marissa wrapped her scarf tighter, walking slowly beside him. She had grown used to the silence between them, the kind of silence that spoke where her heart had time to catch the rhythm of a new song. There was no need to fill the quiet with hurried words. Gabriel's presence was enough. Each step beside him felt like a soft breath, soothing the loneliness that had lingered even in the middle of crowds. Marissa told him about Ethan's strange little habit. Whenever they had to make an important decision, they always waited for a bird to appear as a sign. Gabriel listened without interrupting his gaze, patient as though it belonged only to her. For a moment, Marissa hesitated, worried that speaking of Ethan too much might wound him. But when she caught the gentle curve of a smile at the corner of his mouth, that fear dissolved. Just then the sky above shifted. A flock of birds appeared suddenly, sweeping across in the sharp shape of an arrow. The beat of their wings rose into a deep, steady chorus. Marissa looked up, her eyes instantly blurred with tears. "Ethan!" she whispered, her voice trembling as if carried away on the wind. Memories surged, the day he proposed beneath a sky, alive with wings, the mornings they stood together on the balcony, waiting for sparrows to nest under the eaves. Each bird had been a stitch binding fragments of memory into the fabric of their love. Gabriel remained at her side. He didn't speak, didn't pull her away from the moment. Instead, he reached for her hand. The touch wasn't urgent or insistent, just a quiet affirmation. "I'm here. You're not alone." When she turned to him, there was no jealousy in his eyes, no comparison, only respect, only understanding. Her heart quivered, not with guilt, but with gratitude. She realized then, signs didn't belong only to the past. They could be miracles of the present too, guiding her towards something new, another kind of warmth. A tear fell, but Marissa smiled through it. She squeezed Gabriel's hand. Maybe she whispered, her voice soft as wind. "These birds aren't only carrying Ethan's message. Maybe they're telling me it's time to move forward." Gabriel nodded, saying nothing. His silence was the greatest gift of all. They continued along the lakeside. The sky deepened to violet street lamps flickering to life. Marissa felt her steps grow steadier. Her love for Ethan would never disappear, but it no longer bound her in chains. It had become wind at her back, lifting her into a new journey. One where Gabriel walked patiently at her side. In her heart, past and present no longer opposed each other. They stood together like two melodies, different in note, yet woven into harmony. The flock above was proof life carried on, and love, shifting form, remained eternal. That night at home, she still switched on the television, but turned the volume down to a distant murmur. Sitting by the window, she lifted her gaze to the silver moon. Gabriel's warmth lingered in her hand. Softly, as though speaking to them both, she whispered, "I believe in signs, and I'll believe in the miracles they carry." A smile blossomed tender and true, a promise to herself of brighter days. The following evening, the office lay quiet, only a few desk lamps still lit. Marissa was gathering her papers when Gabriel entered holding a stack of sketches and a small envelope. There was something different in his eyes, calm but deeper, surer. "Marissa?" he said, his voice gentle yet firm. "There's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time." She looked up, her hand frozen on the pile of pages. Her heart pounded, a storm rising inside her. Gabriel stepped forward and placed the envelope on the desk. Inside was a simple pencil sketch, a woman sitting by a window, a sparrow perched on the sill. The lines were unadorned, yet warmth radiated from the page. Marissa recognized it instantly. It was her. Her fingers trembled as they touched the paper. Gabriel drew a steady breath. "I know your heart once belonged to Ethan, and I honor that. But Marissa, I need you to know, I'm not here to replace him. I want to write a new chapter with you. I want to build a future with you. Even if pain still lingers in your heart, I'm willing to go slowly, so long as we go together." His words fell into the silence, reverberating inside her chest like a deep drum beat. Tears rose, tangled with fear and wonder. Future, a word that had vanished from her life, now rose from his lips, close and real. "Gabriel," she stammered, "I don't know if I'm ready. Sometimes I still feel guilty, as if smiling beside you betrays Ethan." Gabriel didn't answer straight away. He stepped closer, his warm brown eyes holding hers. He took her hand, placed it over his heart. The beat was steady, alive. "I don't ask you to forget the past," he said softly. "I only ask you to let the present have a place. Your heart is wide enough to hold both memory and new joy. Marissa, will you give me that chance?" Emotions swelled, tightening her throat. Her hand trembled against his chest, feeling the rhythm, true, unwavering, like a lighthouse guiding her through the fog of loss. She drew in a breath. Tears fell, but a smile unfurled with them. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll try. I want to move forward. With you." Gabriel exhaled as though laying down a weight. He leaned in, and their first kiss touched her lips. Not hurried, not blazing, but warm, healing, like a promise. "I will be here. I will be patient. We will walk together." Marissa closed her eyes, letting her heart lead. In that kiss, Ethan lingered in memory, smiling, not reproachful, but offering his blessing. That night in her apartment, Marissa paused in the familiar living room. The soft yellow lamp bathed the wedding photo on the shelf. She stood there a long time, her heart heavy yet calm. Her hand lifted to the pendant. Slowly, she unclasped the bird she had worn for 2 years. Her fingers shook, but her eyes stayed steady. She placed it beside the photo frame. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice light as air. "Thank you for the beautiful love I will never forget. But now, I believe you want me happy too. Let me carry you in a warm corner of my heart as I take the next step." Her hand lingered on the frame for a few seconds, reluctant, tender. Her smile shone through tears, no longer bitter, but filled with gratitude, with release. Then she turned away and walked into her bedroom. Marissa's heart had opened a new door, towards Gabriel, towards the present, towards a future waiting just ahead. A year had passed. Morning light spilled into the 7th-floor apartment, slipping through white curtains, stretching across crowded bookshelves and pots of lavender. Marissa opened the window and drew in a deep breath. This apartment had once been a prison for her grief, filled only with the drone of the television and midnight tears. Now it had become a home, alive with laughter. Gabriel's unfinished sketches scattered across the table, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with soft music each morning. Gabriel appeared from the kitchen, holding 2 cups. The sunlight caught his thick glasses, brightening his smile. "Here you go," he said, "with a touch of honey, just the way you like it." Marissa accepted, sipped, and let the sweetness spread across her tongue, warmth rising through her chest. She looked at Gabriel, then around the apartment. On the wall, Ethan's photograph still hung beside the new paintings Gabriel had put up. It was no longer a sealed-off corner of the past, but woven into her present, a memory she cherished, even though her heart now belonged wholly to Gabriel. They weighed on a gentle autumn afternoon. No extravagance, no noise, just an intimate ceremony in the garden of a small, time-worn chapel. Close friends, colleagues from the newsroom, a few of Gabriel's family from afar, all were there. Marissa wore a simple white dress, as light as morning sunlight. Gabriel, in a deep blue suit, shone with happiness. They spoke their vows beneath an arch of white flowers. As the priest offered his final blessing, the chapel's wooden door suddenly swung open with the breeze. A sparrow perched on the frame, its dark eyes curious, its song ringing out bright and clear. The solemn air burst into laughter. Marissa froze, her vision swimming with tears. She gripped Gabriel's hand, whispering, "Ethan is blessing us." Gabriel only smiled and nodded. He didn't question, didn't explain. He understood. For Marissa, birds would always be the language of love, and Gabriel honored that. The kiss they shared after their vows was more than the joining of two souls. It was the harmony of past and present. In her heart, Marissa saw Ethan smiling from somewhere beyond, while Gabriel's hand held hers here now. Nothing was erased, nothing denied. Everything lived together, making her heart larger. That evening back at the apartment, Marissa sat at the small table by the window. On it lay a stack of blank pages beside Gabriel's newest sketchbook. Together, they had been nurturing the idea of a book, not only about constellations or birds, but about love, memory, and continuity. She picked up her pen, her heart trembling as though touching a manuscript for the first time. She remembered it all the nights when the television filled the silence, the dream beneath the oak with Ethan Gabriel's patient hand, the healing kiss in the quiet office, and the sparrow perched at the chapel door earlier that day. All of it flowed together, carrying her gently into this moment. Smiling, she wrote the opening line. "Love never dies. It only seeks a new sky to fly across." Gabriel came to stand behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder, leaning down to read. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Marissa looked up, her eyes glistening in the golden lamplight. She knew this wasn't just the beginning of a book. This was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, a sky wide enough for her to take flight beside him. Outside the window, night draped itself across the city. A late flock of birds swept by, tracing a graceful curve against the violet sky. Marissa followed them, with her eyes whispering, "Thank you, Ethan, and thank you, Gabriel. I am happy." For the first time in years, her heart felt whole, at peace. A year later, on a balcony draped in lavender, Marissa set down her cup of jasmine tea and lifted her face to the early summer sky. Sparrows chattered on the telephone wire, their song scattering like small notes across the morning. She smiled, realizing she no longer counted their wings as messages from the past, but welcomed them as companions of the present. Inside the apartment, Gabriel was bent over his easel, his shirt dusted with pencil smudges. Soft music drifted through the rooms, mingling with the scent of coffee and the lavender breeze from the balcony. Ethan was still here, not as a ghost holding her back, but as a lantern that had lit her way to this moment. On the wooden shelf, their wedding photograph now stood beside a freshly bound book, its first page engraved with the words, "Love never dies. It only seeks a new sky to fly across." Marissa knew the heart was never asked to choose between old and new. It only needed to stretch to hold memories in a warm drawer while making space for today's laughter. Every bird in the sky was a bridge now, linking what she had lost, what she held, and what she dared to dream. Her hand rested on the pendant that now lay quietly beside the photograph. She whispered, "I still hear you in the bird song, Ethan, and I am hearing myself too." From inside, Gabriel called, "Marissa, come see this new sketch." She turned, her heart beating slow and steady. The road ahead made no promise of perfection, but it was wide enough for love to walk alongside her, past, present, and all the tomorrows still to come. In the morning breeze, a flock of birds curved across the sky. Marissa breathed in, letting her breath fall into rhythm with their wings. And she smiled, the smile of someone who had learned how to fly again.